So I came across this YouTube channel, Astra, which also does the same work which I am doing with my YouTube channel. In other words, comparing different setups with different heroes for Age of Empires Mobile. And as you can see, yes, I am subscribed to this channel and I have watched this video right here. Ramses versus Miyamoto. Or to be more precise, the analysis is about Miyamoto together with Laghetta and Tribbiwana versus Mr. Ramses with Laghetta and Tribbiwana. And when we have a closer look at the numbers, here you see that Ramses has a damage per second output of 3,219 points every single second, while Mr. Miyamoto is reaching a damage per second of 2,268 points. So yeah, round about 1,000 points less damage per second coming from Miyamoto. So that made me curious and tested myself. Now I really have to add in here that his opponent is Cyrus, Ramcam and Mansa Musa, while the analysis which I'm going to present you is versus the support Depot Boss. But fear not, beautiful people, because the golden expedition is coming and our opponent is server 33. And one of the viewers of this channel is I Am Rocket. And obviously I have reached out to him and asked him to help me do endless PvP battle tests, and I'm going to present you those numbers once I have them. Hello beautiful people, Timmy is here with nothing short than an amazing episode based on numbers like I have never done before to highlight the difference between Miyamoto and Ramses. But first I would like to highlight the comment made from Mr. The Never 794 on this YouTube channel. And a short version of this is, Timmy, I cannot always watch your episode, but I can listen to them, and by doing that, I literally learn nothing. So my answer is Mr. The Never 794. Thank you very much for this great advice, and I will gonna implement this starting with this episode, and hopefully if you keep an eye on my channel, or better said, an ear on my channel, you can let me know if the videos are improving. So what I'm running right now is Miyamoto, Laghetta and Tribbiwana. And here you see, yeah, Mata from server S4, shout out to him, versus, yeah, King Arthur, Tribbiwana and Laghetta. And when we have a look at the results, sure, I lost, while Mata still had 66,534 units still left alive. Now I'm absolutely super happy with this result, but the question which this video will gonna answer, can I improve this setup? Miyamoto, Laghetta and Tribbiwana? No, absolutely not. Not with King Arthur. It's a fantastic hero, but the price is $8,100 and no way on earth the price actually makes sense, which brings us, yeah, to today's topic, which is Miyamoto versus Ramses. So let's briefly go through both setups so you see what am I using. So on Miyamoto, of course, the gear is level 80 and it's going to be the same gear on Ramses. What you can see here is that I will not going to use a ring on Miyamoto, neither on Ramses. And of course, let's briefly have a look at the gems also. For Miyamoto, on his helm, I'm using 3 capacities gems. Then on the gloves, obviously it's gonna be 3 might. On Ramses is gonna be 3 strategy. On the chest, I'm using 3 active skill gems, and on the boost, I'm using 1 hero capacity, 1 hero might, and 1 active skill damage. Now let's briefly just look only once at the setup for Laghetta and Tribbiwana, because it's literally not gonna change. So first of all, the ring is the Scourging Flame, which I'm using on Laghetta. The gear is also at level 80. On the helm I have 1 defense gem, 7%, 1 health gem and 1 capacity gem. On the gloves I have 3 might gems. On the chest I have 3 times hero active skill damage, and on the boots I have 1 capacity gem, 1 might gem and 1 hero active skill damage. Let's briefly show also Tribbiwana, starting with the ring, which is the Skyward Knight. Then the gear is also at level 80. On the helm I have 3 hero capacity. On the gloves I have 1 all attributes, 1 armor and 1 all attributes gems. On the chest I have 3 hero recovery effects, so basically the healing. And on the boots I have 1 capacity, 1 might and 1 healing gem. So that's the lineup for Miyamoto. Now let's briefly have a look at Ramses. The gear is literally the same, and so is also the setup for Laghetta and Tribuana. So the only difference is actually on the gloves, on which I'm using 3 times hero strategy gems, and of course on the boots, in which I use 1 strategy gem instead of the might gem. So now let's put first the numbers for Miyamoto, Laghetta and Tribuana on the screen. There are 20 attacks, and of course you see in here, very nice highlighted, the fields for Miyamoto, Laghetta and Tribuana, but also the total damage of the entire march and the average numbers. What you also see in here is separated Miyamoto, we're gonna need that, and again separate the entire Miyamoto March battle results, because we're gonna need that. And don't worry, Mr. Never, even if you're listening, you will be able to understand this. And now on the screen you are seeing the numbers of the setup of Ramses together with Laghetta and together with Tribuana, again in the same way. 20 battle reports, all these numbers beautifully highlighted in here. Also super important, we're gonna need just the numbers for Ramses and also the numbers showing the entire setup performance. But now let's put both these numbers back to back in order to analyze them, because yes indeed, you're gonna see here the performance of Miyamoto alone in this setup is 26,535 damage per second versus Ramses, which is also together with Laghetta and Tribuana, reaching a 37,061 points damage per second. And yeah, sure, this looks crazy, because if we're only gonna compare Miyamoto's performance with Ramses' performance, you are seeing literally here that Ramses' damage per second output is 39.66% higher than Miyamoto's damage. But beautiful people, this is not the entire truth, because what's even more important is the entire March performance. And when we look at these numbers, Miyamoto, Laghetta and Tribuana reaches a damage per second average of 46,944 points, while Ramses, Laghetta and Tribuana reaches a damage per second average of 46,224 points. Which means, in other words, that Miyamoto, Laghetta and Tribuana does 1.5% better. But let's dig even deeper into this, because it's gonna be worth it. So why does Miyamoto have a 39.66% lesser damage output, but his March actually does 1.5% better than the setup with Ramses? And the numbers actually show us, because Miyamoto is buffing Laghetta, and her damage output in Miyamoto's setup is 16,783 points, while when we have a look at the performance of Laghetta with Ramses as commander, you see this massively dropping to 6,031, which is basically a drop of 64% less damage output coming from Laghetta. And since the numbers will always be able to show us a difference, no matter how small it is, let me add something which I have done for the first time, as it's gonna help us a lot to highlight another difference between Miyamoto and Ramses being with the same heroes, Laghetta and Tribuana. And I'm gonna add another graphic right now in order to highlight this, because in all these mobile war games, it's always the same. You will be able to find an average March performance, which is in this case, the difference is just 1.5%, which is kind of guaranteed, but what else is actually even more important and also guaranteed, it's actually the result output, because that's actually an interval, not just only a number. And in this case, it's important to highlight that between Miyamoto and Ramses, because when we have a look at Miyamoto, sure, the average damage output is 26,535 damage per second, but just from these 20 battle reports, the interval starts with the lowest damage outputs if you are super unlucky, which is 21,779, representing minus 17.92% difference to the average. And the upper end of this interval, in which you can be super lucky, Miyamoto can reach a maximum of 31,703 points damage per second, which represents a plus 18.84% more than the average. Now let's do the same also for Ramses. As in his case, the average performance of Ramses alone is 37,061 points damage per second, but the result interval looks slightly different. As the minimum damage output which you can reach on Ramses, it's around 29,755 points, which represents minus 19.71 points if we compare it to the average performance. And the upper end of his interval, in which you get super lucky, you can reach 44,318 points damage per second, which represents a plus 19.58% when compared to the average performance of Ramses alone. But let's show the same interval for the entire marches, because that's the most important thing. For the entire Miyamoto march, it has an average march performance of 46,944 points, while this result interval starts at the minimum performance, which is 37,430 points, which represents a minus 20.26% lesser performance than the average, or in other words, when you're absolutely unlucky. And the upper end of this interval is when the entire march reaches 54,740 points, which is a plus 16.62%. Let's do the same for Ramses' entire march, as the average march performance is 46,228, and the results interval starts at a minimum of 38,627, which represents a minus 16.44%, while the upper end of this interval brings us to 52,521 points, which represents a plus 13.61%, while referring to the average march performance. So in other words, using Miyamoto together with our getter entry B1, we're gonna give you an interval of results starting from minus 20.26% all the way up to 16.62% plus, which is a total of 36.88% value. While on the other side, we see Ramses together with Lagetta entry B1 giving you a result interval which goes from minus 16.44% all the way up to plus 13.61%, which represents an interval of 30.05%. So what are these important numbers telling? That the setup with Ramses Lagetta entry B1, it's actually 6.83% more consistent, while the interval is smaller, meaning in other words, overall, no matter if you're lucky or unlucky, you're gonna slightly perform better. Now let's add another couple of things to these numbers. The fact that Miyamoto is not possible to be unlocked by the free-to-play players, while on the other side, Ramses, as the developer said, we will be given a chance to unlock this hero, and after that you can use the universal hero fragments to bring him up. Hopefully it's gonna be in a free-to-play way. And also on top, when you're opening all these gems, chests, of course you're gonna get strategy gems also, allowing you to take the My Gems off Miyamoto and use it somewhere else. Now, in order to conclude such an amazing episode, 3 more things must be added. Number 1, yes, let's compare these results of mine with the PvP results. Number 2, let's briefly explain also how to build this match from the beginning, also for the free-to-play players. And number 3 will also gonna be an important thing. So bear with me guys, we are almost done. So first let's go back to Astar Age YouTube's channel, back to this episode right here, Ramses versus Miyamoto, and see if there are any differences between his PvP testing versus my tests done against the supply depot boss. So let's make it easier for all of us by putting these 2 screenshots back to back. So we see here the average damage performance of Miyamoto is 2,268. The average damage per second of Ramses is 3,219, which is, by the way, around 1,000 points more damage per second. The average battle time is 63 seconds, pretty much for both setups. In my case, it varied between 24 seconds and maximum 48 seconds. And the opponent here is Cyrus, Ram, and Mansa Musa, which is, by the way, a single target, while in my case, the supply depot boss are actually 4 marches. And let me show you something interesting, because his battle duration is slightly longer than mine. So what exactly happens versus such an opponent? So even if the opponent has the two best and most powerful rings in Age of Empires Mobile, one being the Tranquil Water and the other one being the Lofty Mountain, after 18 seconds, this effect right here is gone. What else happens after 18 seconds? The effect from the Lofty Mountain actually switches from the damage reduction into a damage increase. But what else happens after 18 seconds? None of the marches will have a full march anymore. And the lower amount of units you have, the lower your damage will gonna be. And on top, of course, the other factors which are implemented in combat system in Age of Empires Mobile, like hero activation skills, and so on and so on. So the difference between my tests and his tests are not that big whatsoever. But here you really have to pay attention to the presentation. While these numbers right here are absolutely correct, the most important part on your screen are actually these numbers exactly over here. Because sure indeed, Ramses does far more damage than Miyamoto. You see here 132,000 damage output versus 95,000 damage output coming from Miyamoto. But here you really have to pay attention because again, Miyamoto is buffing Largetta. And you see here Largetta with 52,937 points damage output, while Largetta together with Ramses drops down to 19,834 damage, which is well over 30,000. But not just that, you also see that Tribuana in the setup with Miyamoto is here at around 12,500 points damage, while Tribuana in the setup with Ramses it's at 7,500 points damage. So another 5k here. So in other words, I don't expect massive deviation from these numbers. In other words, Miyamoto with Largetta and Tribuana does 1.5% more damage on average, while Ramses with Largetta and Tribuana does 1.5% less damage on average. But based on the entire interval being smaller, you're actually going to be 6.85% more consistent, which is a positive thing. Good. Point number 2. How should you build this match? How should you start? And of course also for free to play. Now, presumably the developers will gonna allow us to unlock Ramses, which is an XMG hero. Sure indeed, this hero should have your maximum priority in stars, but just start at 1 star, all 3 of them. And by the way, having to be 1 at 1 star is basically the end. The hero is absolutely great at 1 star, is not needed. Then go to 3 stars with Ramses, go to 3 stars with Largetta, stop with Largetta at 3 stars, and then move slowly towards 5 stars on Ramses, because it's gonna be worth it. Now, we really have to talk about the rings, sure, because there are a lot of alternatives, and you must be super efficient, especially if you are a lower spender. So, in the case of Ramses, sure, you see me using the Azure Mount. It's a ring for 1,400 of those coins, not 4,000. But you have plenty alternatives. But let's have a look first at Largetta. Here I'm using the Scourging Flame as an example. And of course on Tribuana I'm using the Skyward Knight. But in general for all 3 heroes, what rings will be good? And let's start with the ring which you actually see me using on my cavalry. And that's the Ring of Clover. It's not just only being extremely cheap. This is absolutely crazy, and you're gonna see that also in the battle reports. It procs a lot of times, and this 25% damage reduction is absolutely massive. For the next 2 rings, I also suggest something with damage reduction. Sure, we have here the Ring of the Falcon. It's absolutely great, and it's always better to equip something instead of having nothing. And then of course, we have more alternatives. Ring of Bear is a great one. And even this one, the Ring of the Rose, it's a great one, as you do 125% damage, plus a strategy bonus. So yeah, plenty of alternatives pretty much for everybody. Good, now to the last point, which is needed in order to wrap up this video, which is me and you both right now have to face the reality, or in other words, I could say this is exactly the moment in every single video in which I have to start to beg, because the vast majority of the people don't understand this. As in order to make a video like you have just witnessed, step number 1 is first to gather the data, which looks something like this. Step number 2 is to shoot the raw video. What? It was 30 minutes and 18 seconds long? Good. Step number 3 is actually to take this video and cut it down to the end version. But you are not done, because you're also going to need step number 4 to take this short video and polishing by adding some special effects, adding some numbers which help players understand even better the case which I'm trying to present you. So in other words, beautiful people, we are talking about 18, 20, 26, 28 hours of work from the beginning till the end. Or in other words, if you find value in these videos, all you need in order to motivate me to carry on and do such type of videos on more topics are 3 things which are also at the same time free. So subscribe to this channel, definitely watch the videos till the end, because I do consider they have a certain solid value. And of course, don't forget to share this channel with your friends. And yeah, beautiful people, this is a wrap for this episode. I hope you loved it. I hope you liked it. I hope it has a value. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm gonna catch you in the next one. Ciao, ciao, ciao.